And thanks for joining me. That's Hawkeye here for episode number two of my look into why the Toronto Maple Leafs have not won a cup since 1967. And it's very early in our journey, but this is kind of sort of more of like a history of the Toronto Maple Leafs with Hawkeye. But tonight, I'm going to bring to you, or I'm going to talk about the 1963-64 season in the NHL. And talk about all the teams, really, not just Toronto. There were six teams at the time, the original six. So I'm going to talk about that and look at the Toronto Maple Leaf lineup and who's in it to begin the season, from what I could tell. Um, the Leafs had just come off their second Stanley Cup in a row with Punch Imlach behind the bench. And I certainly, when I think of him behind the bench, instantly I think of him with a stern look, but also with the handsome fedora hat on his head, coaching, standing behind all the players. And this was Punch's, if I didn't already say that, Punch's second Stanley Cup with the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I imagine going into this season, they must have had very lofty expectations for this team um, to see if they could three-peat. I don't even know if that was a term back in the 60s, but to see if they could win yet another Stanley Cup. So I would say at the time, in 1963-64, there was only six teams. They were known as the original six. Now, at the end of the season, it was the Montreal Canadiens who led the way, coached by Toe Blake, um, certainly in the Hockey Hall of Fame, and led by Captain Jean Beliveau, who won the Hart Trophy that year as the MVP of the league. He had 28 goals at the end of the season. Defenseman Jacques Leperrier won the Calder as the Rookie of the Year. He was also an All-Star that year too for Montreal. In net for the Habs was Charlie Hodge, who won the Vezina that season and had 33 wins, which is a pretty good number. And Montreal ended the season with 85 points. And there was 70 games played back then. They weren't playing 82 like they do now. They were playing 70 games back then. In second place, it was the Chicago Blackhawks. They had quite a lineup going on. It was They were coached by ex-Leaf coach Billy Ray, um, who was coaching the Leafs when Punch Imlach took over. Led by Stan Mikita, who led the league with 89 points that season, and Bobby Hull, who led the league with 43 goals. Kenny Warham was also on the team. He got the Lady Bing, and he had 39 goals that season. So they had a good offensive output going on in Chicago this season. Pierre Pilote grabbed the Norris as the top defenseman in the league. And he also led the league in, I get you, it is a controversial stat, but he led the league in plus minus. He was a plus 31 that season. In net for the Hawks, it was Glenn Hall, fantastic goalie who had 34 wins, one more than Hodge in Montreal. And they ended up just 1 point less than Montreal in the standings, and they had 84 points. So it was a real tight race going on in the season. In third place at the end of the year was the Leafs. I'll definitely get more into them once we go through all the teams. But they were in third place and they had 78 points at the end of the season. In fourth place, it was the Detroit Red Wings. They were coached by former Red Wing, Sid Abel, led by Gordie Howe, who had 26 goals that year, and he was 35 years old. Don't worry. I don't think he's winding down quite yet. In net for the Wings was future Leaf Terry Sawchuk. He had 25 wins for the Wings. Oh, yeah, yeah. So what happened back in the original six? It was the top four teams that would make the playoffs. And during this time, it wasn't, you may think, number one plays number four, number two plays number three. No, The number one team played the number three team, and the number two team played the number four team. I'm not sure why. It really actually does makes more sense to play top seed against bottom seed, but that's not how they did it back then. That will change at some point. But it was one against three, two against four when the playoffs started. Um, so the two teams that were out of it were way out of it. It wasn't really a race to see who would make the playoffs. They weren't very good. It was defensively as well as offensively. They were behind the other teams, but they will be getting better for sure. In fifth place, first off, was the New York Rangers. They were coached by Red Sullivan at the time, led by Phil Goyette and Rod Gilbert. In net for the Rangers was Jacques Plante. He did grab 22 wins for the Rangers. Now, his goals against average, though, was about one goal a game more than the other goalies on the playoff teams. So that would maybe make you ask, hey, was he maybe not quite as good of a goalie as the others? No way. This guy is deservedly in the Hockey Hall of Fame. He later would play for Toronto and play quite well for Toronto years down the road. So he was still a good goalie. What the problem was is he was facing on average 37.6 shots a game. Way too much. That's a lot. For example, in first place, Montreal, Charlie Hodge was getting 28.2 shots a game, almost 10 shots less. That's a lot. There's your goal. That's a big difference. The Rangers, when you're looking at this, they need to improve their defense, improve, um, yeah, getting the shots on net, maybe getting the puck out of their own zone or be able to put pressure on the other team. They also had the worst goals against in the league. It was the New York Rangers. So they really needed to improve that. Now, finally, in last place was the Boston Bruins. Um, I don't think they were very good at this point in their existence. They were coached by former Bruin great Milt Schmidt. He was coaching them. They were led by future Leaf Murray Oliver, who he led the squad with 24 goals. In net was yet another future Leaf in Eddie Johnstone. Um, Here's a crazy stat, maybe to some people that may not be aware of this, what happened at one time. He literally played every second of every game for the Boston Bruins that year. He played in all 70 games. That happened at one time. I do remember Johnny Bauer doing that at one time. He played every game. Um, I think even when he was a rookie, he played for the New York Rangers. I think he played every game for them. But yeah, that happened at one time. You had a goalie, and that was your guy. He must have been very good. He certainly stuck around the league for a while, and he was a good goalie. Um, Now he faced, as I said, Jacques Plante had 37.6 shots. He didn't do very much better. He had 35.1 shots a game. That's still way too many. So the Bruins need to fix their defense as well. And the Bruins only had two 20 goal scorers. The Leafs only had three, but their defense was much better. But the Bruins only had two, the other being Dean Prentice, who had 23 goals. And that was it for the Bruins. So as a team, they only had 170 goals in 70 games. That is 2.4 goals a game. Not good enough when you're allowing that many shots. So they really needed to make some big changes in their team, and they would get it in a few years by with a guy by the name of Bobby Orr, but that's not right now. Um, so yeah, it's hard to win with so little offense. And that's what they had, the worst offense in the league. So I'll jump over to the Leafs and talk about who's on their squad for this season to start off. It was George Armstrong who was the captain for the Leafs. He was the captain for many years there. He was one of the three players for the Leafs that had 20 goals. He had 20. Dave Keon, he had 23. And Frank Mahovlich, the big M, he had 26 goals. Keon led the team with 60 points. And both he and Armstrong, they banged in 7 power play goals, leading the team. That's not a whole heck of a lot, but they both had 7 power play goals. And Bobby Paulford had 4 shorthanded goals. That's pretty good. I think he scored quite a few over the course of his career. And he actually led the league that year in shorthanded goals with 4. Timmy Horton had the most game-winning goals for the Leafs with 7, which is pretty darn good for a defenseman. And Eddie Shack, he led the team with 128 penalty minutes. In net for the Leafs was Johnny Bauer. He was their number one goalie. He played 51 games. He had 24 wins and a very, very nice 932 save percentage, a sparkling 2.11 goals against average, and he had 5 shutouts as well. The other goalie was Don Simmons. He played 21 games. He had 9 wins, but his individual numbers were really not comparable to Bauer's. His goal or his save percentage, I'm sorry, was 894, and his goals against was over a goal more. It was 3.18 goals against average. But he did still have 3 shutouts. So that was good for Simmons. Um, and just to note as well, this was the final year for Ed Litzenberger. He was there for the previous 2 cups. He did end up playing just 19 games for the Leafs this year. He had a couple of goals. But they had a couple, or a few, I'm sorry, young guys coming in the lineup. Primarily Jimmy Pappen came in. He played 50 games as a rookie. He had 11 goals, while Pete Stemkowski and Ronnie Ellis, they suited up for 1 game in their first game in the NHL this season as well. Now, I mentioned in a previous video, but I'll just go back to it. At this time in hockey, there were ties. Um, when the 60 minutes was over, you would tie. They didn't have overtime. That was just for the playoffs. And personally, my own personal feeling, I really never had a problem with ties. Sometimes it felt good, really good to get a tie, especially if it's a really good team in the league and you're up and coming or trying to find your way as a team. It feels really good to get a tie. And sometimes you should have got more than a tie, but that's what you're left with. So it's kind of a bad taste in your mouth sometimes a tie. That was just part of the game. That didn't always happen. Sometimes they're evenly matched, and that's what you deserve, a tie. No one really won the game. But not any longer. For quite a while, they had overtime, and if that doesn't solve it, they go to a shootout, which I must say I've never really liked the shootout. It was very gimmicky to me, but anyways, I didn't grow up with that, so I never really liked that. But anyways, at this time, a tie was a tie, and move on. So yeah, and then by the end of the season, just to give you their record, the Leafs had a 33, 25, and 12 record, which ain't bad. That's not bad. Put them in third place. Now to go with the ranking in the league with the Leaf players, Frank Mahovlich led the team in the league. He was fifth overall. He was tied with Gordie Howe with the 26 goals, and Keon's 60 points ranked him 10th in the league. Um, so as you can kind of tell, there was only 6 teams. They were not up at the top of the league with goals, and that was fine. Overall, they were third in goals. They were also third in goals against. So it was fine that they weren't so great at putting the puck in the net because they were also pretty good at keeping it out of the net. They had a plus 20 goal differential as well, which is good. So that made up for the fact they weren't putting the puck in the net. And I'm pretty darn sure Imlach wanted that defensive hockey going. He wasn't a run and gun style coach at all. He wanted defense first. in his hockey. So yeah, now to let you know about the rosters back then, they had a different rule at that time. Your roster was actually only 16 players. It's 18 now, but it was 16 plus the goalies. Now it's 18 plus two goalies. Then it was 16 plus goalies, and you could literally only dress one goalie, and that's it. So you could get away with just 17 players going in there. That changed in 1965-66 when they changed that rule to you had to dress two goalies. You had to do that for every game. So I will now show you the roster for the Leafs. I have it on a whiteboard. My lovely wife just bought for me. She made sure she got a maple leaf blue. And here it is. And I'll go through the players here with you. So we have Frank Mahovlich. And I'm not sure. I apologize if this really wasn't how the lines were constructed all the time, but I just in my mind I was thinking maybe that's it. But you had Frank Mahovlich, Dave Keon, George Armstrong up at the top there. You got Bobby Pulford, Red Kelly, who I really haven't mentioned yet. He played defense in Detroit before coming to Toronto and was a centerman. Pretty amazing. He's definitely in the Hockey Hall of Fame, and I believe he has 8 Stanley Cups over his career. You got Bobby Nevin, Eddie Shack, Ron Stewart, Jimmy Pappin, Dick Duff, and Billy Harris, rounding out the forwards. And as you can see, they only have three 20 goal scorers. Sorry if that's not straight. My apologies. And they only had two guys in the teams with goals on the whole team, so they didn't have a whole lot of goals. But on defense, um, I was just saying to my wife, all five of these guys, boy, they could all hit. Yeah, Tim Horton, Alan Stanley, Bobby Bond, Carl Brewer, and Kent Douglas. Now we got extras. We got Ed Litzenberger, and I put Larry Hillman there as well. He played quite a few games for the Leafs that year as well. And in that you got Johnny Bauer and Don Simmons as well. So that's kind of what you're looking at as your team for the 1963-64 season. And looking at that, I'm like, wow, you got some good players there. Don't let those numbers fool you. They were a very good team, and I like that defense. That would be a tough defense to play against. Wow, those that would be sorry, like I think that's a tougher defense than any defense in the league now. Like with toughness and try coming into their zone, they'll nail you at the blue line. Throw hip checks, which doesn't happen anymore. They would have been very tough to play against in strong. Definitely. And then as well, within the last episode, there was the draft picks you had. So there's Jim McKinney, who apologies there. He started his career in 1965-66. Played a couple games that year. You also got Walt McKechnie. He started his career in 1967-68. And Jerry Meehan, he started his career in 1968-69. So you got those guys. It's going to be a while for them. They're still teenagers, not quite men yet. But yeah, that's a very well constructed team there. So yeah. Next up, I'm going to do an episode on a big time trade the Leafs made this year, and then they'll be running and gunning for it in the playoffs. So there you have it. That's Hawkeye for Maple Leafs Man Advantage, talking about the 1963-64 season. And don't be afraid if you like this, hit like. Don't be afraid to subscribe. I'm hoping to put a lot of videos on here about the Toronto Maple Leafs. And if you want to comment on anything, go ahead. Maybe you know who was on what line going on there for the season. But anyways, Hawkeye out, and until next time, go Leafs go.